My name is Riley. I'm 24 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my parents treated me like an unfortunate obligation. I kept telling myself that if I was independent enough, they'd finally see my value. But the moment that finally broke the illusion came from a hospital bed. I had just woken up from emergency surgery. The bill was $67,000. When I asked them for help, my mother stood in the doorway, looked down at my IV lines, and scoffed. We saved that money for a daughter who actually matters. The two nurses checking my vitals froze. The heart monitor hummed in the dead silence. I survived. I took on massive debt. I paid my own way while they pretended I didn't exist. I thought I would always be the one drowning. I was wrong. 2 years later, her business went bankrupt, and she showed up at my office begging for a loan. She had no idea what was sitting inside the single document I slid across the desk. What happened next wasn't just going to deny her the money. It was about to destroy her public image and expose exactly where that $67,000 had really gone. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now let me take you back. Growing up, I learned that the best way to handle my family was to be invisible. My parents, Diane and Greg, didn't hate me. They just didn't see any utility in me. To them, children were investments, and my younger sister, Vanessa, was the high-yield stock. I was the overhead cost they wished they could write off. By the time I was 18, I'd mastered the art of paying for my own life. While Vanessa was getting a brand new car for her graduation, I was working double shifts at a local diner to cover my community college tuition. I remember the night Vanessa got the keys to that silver convertible. My parents took her out to a five-star steakhouse to celebrate. I found out about it when I got home from work at midnight and saw the leftovers in the fridge. There wasn't a note, just a half-eaten ribeye and a smear of mashed potatoes. I kept a black leather binder in my desk drawer. It was my survival manual. Every receipt, every pay stub, and every budgeted penny for my future was documented there. I had to know exactly where I stood because I knew no one was going to catch me if I fell. When I graduated and landed my first real job in finance, I thought maybe that would change things. I came to Sunday dinner wearing my first tailored blazer. I waited for a lull in the conversation to tell them I'd been hired as a junior analyst. "That's nice, Riley," my mother said, not even looking up from her wine. "Vanessa, tell them about the storefront we looked at today. The light in the front window is just perfect for your boutique." My father nodded, leaning in with a look of genuine pride I had never seen directed at me. "It's a great location, sweetie. High foot traffic. We'll get the lease signed by Friday." They spent the next hour discussing paint swatches and designer racks. I sat there in my new blazer, feeling the heat of the fabric against my skin. I realized then that my accomplishments weren't just secondary, they were distractions from the main event. Vanessa's boutique, V's Vision, became the family's new obsession. My parents didn't just fund it, they marketed it. They talked about it at every social gathering. My mother began styling herself as a startup mentor, a successful founder who had paved the way for her talented daughter. Meanwhile, I was working 60 hours a week, building a reputation in corporate finance, and quietly moving into my own apartment. They never visited my place. They never asked if I needed help with the security deposit. But when Vanessa's shop needed a custom neon sign that cost $3,000, my dad pulled out his checkbook before she even finished the sentence. That was just how it worked. I was the independent one, which in their language meant I was the one they didn't have to care about. I spent my 23rd birthday at my office desk. I was finishing a quarterly audit, the fluorescent lights humming over my head. Around 9:00 p.m., a sharp, stabbing pain blossomed in my lower abdomen. I tried to walk it off, thinking it was just stress or a bad sandwich. By 10:00 p.m., I was curled in a ball on the carpeted floor of the break room. I didn't call my parents. Even in that kind of pain, my first instinct wasn't help me, it was don't bother them. I called an Uber to the emergency room. The doctors didn't waste time. My appendix had ruptured. I remember the blur of the intake forms, the cold bite of the hospital gown, and the ceiling lights racing past as they wheeled me toward the operating room. I remember the surgeon's face, a woman with tired eyes who told me I was lucky I came in when I did. Then everything went black. I woke up the next morning in a recovery ward. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. My stomach was a map of dull, throbbing aches. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. No missed calls. No texts. I hadn't told them yet, but I realized they hadn't noticed I wasn't answering my usual good morning group text either. I called my mother's cell. She picked up on the fourth ring. "Riley, I'm right in the middle of helping Vanessa with her inventory," she said. Her voice was sharp, impatient. "Mom, I'm in the hospital," I whispered. "I had surgery last night." There was a long pause. I expected a gasp. I expected her to ask which hospital. I expected her to say she was on her way. "Well," she finally said, "I hope you're taking care of the paperwork. You've always been so good with your own bills." That was the first red flag I chose to ignore. I told myself she was just stressed. I told myself that once she saw me, she'd realize how serious it was. I was wrong. The next afternoon, the billing administrator came by. She was a kind woman named Sarah who looked over her spectacles at my file. She explained that because of the rupture and the complications, the total cost for the emergency transport, the surgery, and the 3-day stay was coming to $67,000. The number felt like a physical blow. I was 24. I had a good job, but I didn't have $67,000 in savings. I was still paying off my community college loans. I was still under my parents' high-end family insurance plan, or so I thought. "I'm on my parents' policy," I told her, my voice shaking. "It should cover most of this." Sarah frowned at her tablet. "We'll run the numbers, dear, but right now the primary responsibility is listed under your name." That was when my parents finally showed up. They didn't bring flowers. They didn't bring a change of clothes. My mother walked in first, her heels clicking on the linoleum, looking at her watch. My father stood by the door, leaning against the frame like he was waiting for a bus. "You look pale," my mother said, standing at the foot of the bed. "I almost died, Mom," I said. I felt the tears starting to prick at my eyes, a weakness I hated. "The bill is $67,000. I talked to the billing office. I need help. I can't carry this by myself." My mother didn't move toward me. She didn't take my hand. She just scoffed, a small, ugly sound that cut through the hum of the room. 2 nurses had just entered to check my vitals and hang a new IV bag. They stopped mid-motion. "We saved that money for a daughter who actually matters," my mother said. She said it clearly. She said it like she was stating a fact about the weather. The heart monitor next to my head began to beep faster. I looked at the nurses. One was staring at the floor, her face flushed red with second-hand shame. The other was looking at my mother with a level of disgust that should have been a warning. "Vanessa needs to expand the boutique," my mother continued, ignoring the silence she'd created. "She's building a legacy. You're just fine, Riley, you always have been. You'll figure it out. You're the independent one, remember?" My father didn't say a word. He just pushed off the doorframe and turned to leave. My mother followed him, her silk scarf trailing behind her like a final insult. They left me there with a hole in my side and a debt that felt like a mountain. The room was silent for a long time after the door clicked shut. One of the nurses finally stepped forward and squeezed my hand, but she didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I realized then that my independence hadn't been a choice. It had been a survival strategy for a war I didn't even know I was fighting. The recovery wasn't the hardest part. The silence was. I spent 3 more days in that hospital bed, watching the door every time it creaked open, half expecting my father to slide in with a sheepish look or my mother to bring a fresh change of clothes. Neither of them came. Not once. When the discharge day arrived, I had to call a taxi. I stood on the curb in a pair of oversized hospital scrubs because my own clothes were ruined from the night I collapsed. I felt hollow, like the surgery hadn't just taken my appendix, but the last shred of my childhood delusion that family was a safety net. Then the first bill arrived in the mail. It wasn't just a statement, it was a physical weight. $67,000. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the breakdown. Emergency room intake, anesthesia, surgical suite fees, post-op care. It was a ledger of my survival, and it was written in a language I couldn't afford. My credit score, which I had spent 3 years meticulously building with a low-limit card and on-time utility payments, was about to be incinerated. I tried calling my parents one last time. I thought if I showed them the actual paper, the reality would sink in. "I'm not discussing this, Riley," my mother said over the phone. I could hear the clinking of hangers in the background. She was at Vanessa's boutique. "We've already committed our liquid assets to the spring collection. You have a job. Figure it out." "Mom, it's $67,000, I said, my voice cracking. "I'm 24. This will follow me for the rest of my life." "Then I suggest you work harder," she snapped and hung up. That was the moment the damage became real. It wasn't just a hurt feeling anymore, it was a financial chokehold. I had to make a choice. I could let the debt go to collections and watch my dreams of ever owning a home or moving up in the financial world vanish, or I could set my life on fire to pay it. I chose the fire. I moved out of my apartment 2 weeks later. I couldn't afford the rent and the minimum monthly payments the hospital demanded. I found a room for rent in a house shared by 4 college students. The walls were thin, the kitchen always smelled like old takeout, and I slept on a mattress I bought off a coworker for $50. I took a second job. During the day, I was a junior analyst at the firm, wearing my one good blazer and pretending I hadn't spent the previous night scrubbing floors at a 24-hour gym. I worked from 8:00 a.m. to 5:00 p.m. at the office, then from 6:00 p.m. to midnight at the gym. My physical recovery slowed to a crawl. My incision site throbbed constantly because I never gave it time to rest. I lost 12 pounds in 2 months. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a ghost of the girl I used to be, the one who thought she was independent. Now, I was just exhausted. The worst part was the social cost. My coworkers would go out for happy hour to celebrate a successful closing, and I'd have to make up an excuse about a family dinner. In reality, I was counting out change to see if I could afford a bus pass for the next week. One Saturday, I was walking to the gym for my shift when I passed a local cafe. Through the window, I saw my parents and Vanessa. They were laughing. Vanessa was holding up a magazine. It was a local business feature on V's Vision. My mother was beaming, her hand resting on Vanessa's shoulder in a way she had never touched me. They were eating expensive pastries and drinking lattes that cost more than my hourly wage at the gym. I stood on the sidewalk, my gym uniform hidden under a heavy coat, and watched them. They looked light. They looked like people who didn't have a $67,000 shadow looming over them. I didn't knock on the glass. I didn't go in. I just kept walking. By the end of the first 6 months, I had managed to pay off $5,000. It felt like trying to empty the ocean with a thimble. My health was failing, my social life was non-existent, and my parents had completely stopped answering my texts. They hadn't just abandoned me in the hospital. They had erased me from their narrative because my struggle didn't fit the successful family image they were projecting. I was drowning, and they were the ones holding the life jacket, watching me go under with smiles on their faces. I stopped crying about it after the third month. There wasn't enough energy left for tears. I just worked. I documented every payment. I kept my black binder, but now it wasn't just a survival manual. It was a record of an injustice. I had accepted the debt, but I hadn't accepted the lie. The hospital kept sending notices. Every envelope was a reminder of the night my mother told me I didn't matter. I pinned the most recent statement to the wall above my mattress. It was the first thing I saw when I woke up at 5:00 a.m., and the last thing I saw before I collapsed into sleep at 1:00 a.m. It was my motivation. I wasn't just paying for a surgery anymore. I was paying for my freedom from them. I didn't know then that the paper I was staring at held a secret. I didn't know that the liquid assets my mother was using to fund Vanessa's boutique weren't hers to spend. I just knew that I was alone, I was broke, and I was broken. That was the cost of being the daughter who didn't matter. The next 2 years were a masterclass in endurance. I stopped looking at my life as a series of experiences and started seeing it as a series of transactions. Every hour of overtime at the firm was another brick out of the wall. Every weekend spent mopping floors at the gym was a tiny piece of my soul I was buying back from the hospital. I became a ghost in my own social circle. My friends eventually stopped asking me to dinner because they knew my answer was always "I'm working." They didn't understand that I wasn't being a workaholic, I was being a prisoner. If I missed one payment, the interest would lap me. I lived on a revolving cycle of cheap protein bars and tap water, always checking my bank balance before I even dared to buy a pack of gum. While I was counting nickels, my family's life looked like a high-end catalog. Because I still had them on social media, a mistake I was too tired to rectify, I saw the V's vision expansion. Vanessa didn't just have one boutique anymore, she had two. My mother posted a photo of them at a ribbon-cutting ceremony in the neighboring affluent suburb. They were both wearing designer silk wraps. My mother was holding a glass of champagne, her caption reading, "So proud of my girl for building her dream from the ground up with a little help from her biggest fans." I was reading that post on my phone while sitting in the break room of the gym, my hands still smelling like industrial bleach. I looked at the date of the ribbon cutting. It was exactly 6 months after my surgery. The help they gave her, the liquid assets my mother claimed they had to prioritize, was my survival fund. It wasn't just that they didn't help me. It was that they were thriving on the very resources that could have saved me from this 2-year purgatory. By the 18-month mark, the exhaustion started to bleed into my work at the finance firm. I was a senior analyst now, a promotion I'd earned by being the first one in and the last one out, but my eyes were constantly bloodshot. My boss, a stern but fair man named Marcus, called me into his office one Tuesday. "Riley, your last 3 reports were perfect, but you look like you're about to collapse," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine, Marcus," I said, my voice sounding thin to my own ears. "You're not fine. You're 26 and you have the 1,000-yard stare of a war vet. If this is about the workload, tell me." I couldn't tell him. I couldn't tell my professional mentor that I was drowning in medical debt because my parents preferred my sister's boutique over my life. In the corporate world, that kind of baggage makes you look unstable. It makes you a risk, so I just lied. I told him I was training for a marathon. The lie worked, but the cost increased. My debt was down to $22,000, but my health was starting to fracture again. The scar from my surgery would ache whenever I lifted a heavy mop bucket at the gym. I had chronic migraines from the lack of sleep. The ultimate widening of the harm came when I tried to apply for a small apartment of my own again. I was tired of the roommates, the noise, and the smell of old laundry. I found a studio near the office. The landlord ran my credit. "I can't lease to you, Riley," he said over the phone. "That medical collection is still sitting there. Even with your salary, you're a high-risk tenant." I sat on my $50 mattress and felt the walls closing in. My parents hadn't just refused to pay a bill, they had effectively locked me out of my own adulthood. Every milestone, buying a car, getting a decent apartment, even just having a weekend off, was blocked by the $67,000 ghost they had invited into my life. Meanwhile, Vanessa bought a condo. My mother posted the photos, of course. "Our little girl is officially a homeowner. So glad we could help her secure this gorgeous space. Family always comes first." I didn't throw my phone, I didn't scream. I just opened my black binder and recorded my latest payment, $1,200. I had $20,800 to go. I was paying for a life I wasn't even allowed to live yet. The resentment didn't feel like a hot fire anymore. It felt like cold stone. I stopped thinking about them as parents. I started thinking about them as a debt I hadn't asked for. I stopped wondering why they didn't love me and started wondering how they could look at themselves in the mirror. Then came the day I finally closed the gap. It was 2 years and 3 months after the surgery. I walked into the hospital billing office with a cashier's check for the final balance. I wanted to do it in person. I wanted to see the zero on the screen. Sarah, the administrator who had been there the day my mother scoffed at my IV lines, was still working there. She recognized me immediately. "You've been very consistent, Riley," she said, her voice soft. She remembered the scene in the hospital room. Everyone did. It was the kind of cruelty that leaves a stain on a room. "I'm done," I said, handing her the check. She processed it in silence. The printer whirred, spitting out a final statement. "Balance due, $0.00." "I'm glad for you," Sarah said. She hesitated, looking at the screen, then back at me. "You know, I always felt terrible about how that day went. The way your mother spoke, it wasn't right, especially considering the insurance situation." I paused, my hand on the receipt. "What insurance situation?" "The policy you were on," Sarah said, frowning. "The claim was processed, Riley. I assumed you knew." "Processed?" I felt a strange chill. "The hospital told me the bill was mine. My mother said they wouldn't help." Sarah leaned in, her voice dropping. "The bill was yours legally because of how the intake was coded. But the insurance company did issue a payout for the emergency rupture. It's standard. The check was mailed to the primary policyholder's address, your father's address." I felt the air leave my lungs. "How much was the check?" $67,000, Sarah said. "The exact amount of the bill. It was issued 2 weeks after you were discharged." I stood there, the zero balance receipt in my hand. I had just spent 2 years of my life, 2 jobs, my health, and my dignity paying off a bill that had already been paid by an insurance company. My parents hadn't just abandoned me. They had stolen my life and made me pay for the privilege. The silence from my parents lasted exactly 730 days. During that time, I didn't just pay off the debt, I buried it. I buried the exhaustion, the anger, and the memory of that hospital room floor. I became a different person, sharper, harder, and entirely self-contained. By the time I was 26, I had moved out of the room with the thin walls and into a modest but clean apartment of my own. I had a mahogany desk, a collection of ironed blouses, and a senior position at the firm. I had built a sanctuary where the name Diane or Vanessa was never spoken. Then, the spillover started. It began with a whisper in the local business journals. I was sitting in the break room, scrolling through the morning trades, when I saw a headline: "Local boutique expansion hits legal snag." The article didn't name names, but it mentioned V's vision and unforeseen liquidity issues. I felt a cold prickle of satisfaction, but I pushed it down. It wasn't my business. I had paid my $67,000 entry fee to leave that circus. 2 days later, the first email arrived. It didn't come to my personal account, the one they hadn't messaged in years. It came to my professional firm address. Subject: Personal urgent family matter from Diane, last name, Riley. I saw your promotion on LinkedIn. Your father and I are so incredibly proud of the woman you've become. We've been giving you space to grow, but we've missed you dearly. We need to talk about a business opportunity that would be perfect for someone with your expertise. Let's do lunch tomorrow at the bistro near your office. Love, Mom. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Giving you space to grow was a fascinating way to describe leaving someone to rot in medical debt. The pivot was so fast it gave me whiplash. She wasn't emailing a daughter, she was emailing a senior financial analyst with access to corporate capital. I didn't reply, I deleted it. An hour later, my desk phone rang. My assistant, a bright girl named Maya, buzzed through. Riley, there's a woman on the line named Diane claiming to be your mother. She says it's an emergency regarding your sister. I closed my eyes. The sanctuary was being breached. Put her through, Maya. Riley, thank goodness. My mother's voice boomed, sounding exactly as vibrant and entitled as it did before the surgery. I tried emailing, but I know how busy you big city executives get. Listen, Vanessa is in a bit of a bind with the new store's lease. There's some misunderstanding with the bank. I told her, why are we stressing when we have a financial genius in the family? I'm not a genius, Mom, I'm an analyst, I said. My voice was flat, the sound of a person reading a weather report. And I don't mix family with business. Oh, don't be like that, it's a bridge loan, just a temporary thing to get the third location open. We'd pay you back with interest, obviously. I thought we could meet at your office. I'd love to see where you work. It would look so good for Vanessa to be seen entering a firm like yours. She wasn't even hiding it. She wanted my corporate status to rub off on their failing facade. She wanted to use the daughter she'd discarded to prop up the daughter she'd spoiled. I'm busy, Mom. Riley, please, the boutique is everything to Vanessa. If this lease falls through, she loses the flagship. Is that what you want? To see your sister fail because you're holding onto some hospital drama from years ago? Hospital drama. That was her name for the $67,000 mountain I'd spent 2 years climbing. Fine, I said. The word felt heavy. Thursday, 2:00 p.m. my office. Bring the financial statements for the boutique and your personal guarantee forms. That's my girl, I knew you'd step up. We'll see you then. She hung up, leaving me in the silence of my glass-walled office. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues through the partitions. To them, I was the success story, the girl who worked harder than anyone. They didn't know that my mother was about to walk through those doors and try to treat my career like an ATM. But something was off. My mother was elitist, but she wasn't stupid. She knew I had every reason to say no. Why was she so confident I'd say yes? I turned to my computer and pulled up the public bankruptcy filings for our county. I searched for her name. I searched for Vanessa's. Nothing yet. Then I searched for the boutique's holding company. There it was, a notice of intent to foreclose on the second location. They weren't just in a bind, they were cratering. The lavish lifestyle, the silk wraps, the champagne toasts, it was all a lie built on a foundation of sand. And then I saw the date of the original capital injection for the boutique. It was dated just 3 weeks after my surgery. A lump sum of $67,000. The room seemed to tilt. I remembered Sarah, the billing administrator, telling me the insurance check had been mailed to my father. I remembered my mother telling me they saved that money for a daughter who matters. I had assumed they meant their own savings. I had assumed they were just being selfish. But as I looked at the boutique's ledger and the timing of their sudden wealth, a different picture began to form. They hadn't just chosen Vanessa over me. They had used my near-death experience as a payday. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a hunter. I leaned back in my chair and pulled a single blue folder from my desk drawer. I hadn't looked at my hospital records in months, but I knew exactly where they were. I started making a list of the things I needed to find out before Thursday. The spillover was no longer a threat. It was an opportunity. My mother wanted a business meeting. I was going to give her the most professional experience of her life. I spent the rest of the afternoon looking into our firm's policy on insurance fraud. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I needed the one thing my mother always relied on, a public stage. She wanted to be seen at my office. She wanted the business community to see us together. I decided right then that I would give her exactly what she asked for. I would let her walk right into the center of my world, and I would let her believe she was in control until the very second she wasn't. That was the first time in 2 years I felt like I could breathe. The debt was paid, but the account wasn't settled. Not by a long shot. Discovery didn't happen in a single lightning bolt. It was a slow, cold reconstruction of the past. I started by calling Sarah, the hospital billing administrator. She had been the one to plant the seed, and I needed her to help me water it. We met at a quiet coffee shop 3 miles away from the hospital. She looked nervous, clutching a manila envelope to her chest. "I shouldn't be doing this, Riley," she whispered as I sat down. "Patient privacy is everything. But I watched what that woman did to you in that room. It stayed with me for 2 years." "I'm not asking you to break the law, Sarah," I said, pushing a steaming cup of tea toward her. "I just need the administrative trail. If a check was issued, there's a ledger. If it was cashed, there's a record of the endorsement." Sarah nodded. She opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of the internal hospital billing ledger from 2 years ago. It showed my name, the $67,000 total, and a line item that made my blood turn to ice. Insurance reimbursement received, $67,000. Method, corporate check 4492. Payee, Greg last name. The insurance company sent the full amount to the primary policyholder, Sarah explained. In their eyes, the debt was settled with the family. When you started making those $1,000 monthly payments out of your own pocket, the system just flagged it as an overpayment. We were basically holding your money in an escrow account while the original $67,000 sat in your father's bank. I looked at the dates. The insurance check was deposited on the 14th of the month. On the 16th, my mother had made the Daughter Who Matters speech in my hospital room. They already had the money. They were standing over my bed, watching me beg for my life while the $67,000 was already sitting in their account. They didn't just refuse to help. They watched me pay twice. "There's more," Sarah said. She pulled out a second sheet. It was a scanned image of the back of that insurance check. "The check was made out to your father, but it required your signature as the patient to release the funds to the policyholder. Look at the endorsement line." I leaned in. There was my father's signature, messy and looped. Below it, in a tight, cramped script, was my name. Except it wasn't my handwriting. I was in post-op recovery the day that check was signed. I could barely hold a spoon, let alone sign a legal document. My mother had forged my name to steal my medical payout. "I have everything I need, Sarah," I said. My voice was remarkably steady. "Thank you." I went back to the office and walked straight into Marcus's room. My mentor looked up from his dual monitors, his brow furrowed. "Riley, you look like you've seen a ghost." "I need a favor, Marcus. I need you to pull the public business filings for VS Vision from 2 years ago. Specifically, the initial capital injections." Marcus didn't ask why. He saw the folder in my hand. He knew the marathon training lie had finally collapsed. He typed for a few minutes, his keyboard clicking in the quiet room. Here it is, initial startup capital for the second location. September of that year, a single private loan from the founders in the amount of $67,000. The number was everywhere. It was the cost of my surgery. It was the amount of the stolen check. It was the price of Vanessa's boutique. It was the exact value my parents had placed on my life. Riley, Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. This is fraud, this is serious. I know, I said, and she's coming here on Thursday to ask me for more. Marcus looked out at the glass-walled conference room across the hall. What are you going to do? I'm going to do my job, I said. I'm going to perform a deep dive audit of the request. For the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. The support from Sarah and Marcus didn't make me feel like I had won. It made me feel like I had finally been given the tools to stop the bleeding. The truth was no longer a weight I had to carry alone. It was documented. It was time-stamped. It was undeniable. I spent the next 6 hours preparing a single document. I didn't include a long letter. I didn't include an emotional plea. I simply took the hospital ledger, the image of the forged check, and the boutique's capital injection record. I put them in a single blue folder. The support I received gave me something I hadn't had in years, the ability to detach. I wasn't the wounded daughter anymore. I was a senior financial analyst reviewing a high-risk application, and the applicant was a criminal. That night, I went home and slept for 8 hours straight. I didn't dream about the hospital. I didn't dream about the gym. I just slept. The next morning, I woke up and put on my sharpest suit. I checked my reflection. The girl who lost 12 pounds and slept on a $50 mattress was gone. In her place was a woman who knew exactly what her family was worth. 0. I walked into the office and saw the janitor finishing up the floors. I thought about all the nights I had been that person, scrubbing the grime of other people's lives to pay for a theft I didn't know had happened. I wasn't angry. I was ready. I sat at my desk and waited for the clock to hit 2:00 p.m. on Thursday. I knew that when my mother walked through those doors, she would be expecting the Riley who could be bullied, the Riley who wanted to belong. She would be expecting a daughter. Instead, she was going to find the one thing she never expected: a witness. The leverage wasn't just a secret, it was a payload. I spent the next 48 hours making sure it was formatted for maximum impact. I didn't want to give my mother room to wiggle, to cry, or to claim she'd forgotten the details. I took the image of the cashed insurance check and blew it up. I placed it side by side with the hospital's final ledger. Then, I added the public business filing from Vanessa's boutique. The dates were color-coded in red. Surgery, August 12th. Insurance check issued, August 28th. Insurance check cashed, September 2nd. Boutique capital injection, September 5th. It was a perfect, chronological map of a crime. It wasn't just that she stole the money, it was the speed of it. I was still in bandages, learning how to walk down the hospital hallway with an IV pole while she was already signing my name to fund a storefront. I printed the document on heavy, high-quality office paper. I didn't put it in a fancy binder. I put it in a single, plain blue folder. It looked like any other loan rejection or internal audit. That was the point. I wanted her to think it was just a piece of paper until she actually read the words. I didn't stop there. I knew how my mother operated. She would try to claim it was an advance or a family loan. So I called the insurance company's fraud division. I didn't file a formal police report yet. I wanted that to be the final card, but I spoke to an investigator named Miller. If a signature was forged on a $67,000 payout, that's a felony, Riley, he said. His voice was clipped and professional. We have the original digital scan of the check. If you provide a handwriting sample and a sworn statement, we open a recovery case. We go after the person who cashed it. I have the proof, I told him. I'll have the statement ready by Thursday afternoon. That was my protection. If she tried to cause a scene in my office, if she tried to scream or threaten my job, the digital copies were already sitting in an outgoing send queue to Agent Miller. I was no longer a daughter waiting for an apology. I was a professional with a finger on the trigger of a fraud investigation. On Wednesday night, I sat in my apartment and looked at the blue folder one last time. For 2 years, I had carried the shame of that $67,000. I had felt like a failure because I couldn't pay it fast enough. I had felt unloved because my parents wouldn't help. The leverage changed the chemistry of the memory. It wasn't my shame anymore. It was hers. I thought about Vanessa. I wondered if she knew. I wondered if she realized her vision was built on the theft of her sister's health. Part of me hoped she didn't know for her sake. But another part of me, the part that had mopped floors at 11:00 p.m. while she was posting vacation photos, knew that it didn't matter. She had benefited. She had accepted the liquid assets without asking where they came from. I was ready to make the leverage real. Thursday morning was quiet. I arrived at the firm at 7:30 a.m. I checked the conference room schedule. I had booked the glass-walled room right in the center of the floor, the one nicknamed the fishbowl. Everyone would see us. No one would hear us, but they would see the body language. They would see the moment the power shifted. Marcus walked by my desk around noon. He saw the blue folder sitting face down on my blotter. He didn't say a word. He just tapped the desk twice and kept walking. That was his way of saying he had my back. I checked my email. A confirmation from my mother. On our way, Vanessa is so excited to see your office. See you at 2. She was bringing Vanessa. She thought this was a victory lap. She thought she was bringing the golden child to show me what a real success looked like before I signed over the bridge loan that would save them. I felt a strange, cold calm. It was the same feeling I had when I was balancing a complex audit, everything in its place, every cent accounted for. I cleared my desk of everything except that one folder. I didn't want any distractions. I wanted her eyes to go exactly where I directed them. At 1:55 p.m., Maya buzzed my desk. Riley, your mother and sister are here. Should I bring them back? Yes, Maya, I said. And please lead them straight to the central conference room. I'll meet them there. I stood up, adjusted my blazer, and picked up the folder. It felt light in my hand, but I knew it was the heaviest thing in the building. I walked toward the glass doors. I could see them through the partitions. My mother was wearing a cream-colored power suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, talking animatedly to a passing junior associate like she owned the firm. Vanessa was behind her, looking bored, scrolling on an expensive new phone. They looked like they belonged. They looked like the successful, affluent family they pretended to be. But I had the ledger. I had the forgery. I had the truth. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the conference room. My mother turned, a rehearsed plastic smile spreading across her face. Riley, look at this place. It's almost as nice as Vanessa's flagship, she said, moving in for a hug I didn't return. I stepped back, gestured to the leather chairs, and set the folder down on the polished mahogany table. Sit down, Mom, I said. We have a lot to get through. The leverage was active. The clock was running. And for the first time in my life, I was the one in charge of the room. The countdown didn't feel like a ticking clock. It felt like a tightening knot. I had 48 hours before the meeting. In that time, I had to move with the precision of the auditor I had become. My first move was logistical. I didn't just want the meeting in the fishbowl. I wanted the paper trail to be bulletproof. I sent a formal calendar invitation to my mother's personal email and Vanessa's business account. Purpose: formal review of loan application, Project V's vision. By BCCing our firm's compliance officer, I ensured this wasn't a family chat. It was a recorded professional interaction. If they tried to claim later that I had promised them money or misled them, the digital log would show a rigid, standard procedure. My emotional move was harder. I had to kill the daughter inside me one last time. I went to the back of my closet and pulled out the black leather binder, the one from my community college days. I looked at the entries from the months following my surgery. $200 here, $450 there. The sheer physical effort of those numbers represented hundreds of hours of scrubbing floors while my incisions still burned. I looked at those pages until I felt nothing. No anger, no pity. Just the cold realization that I had been paying a debt to a thief. I was no longer a victim seeking an apology. I was a creditor coming to collect the truth. The risk move happened on Wednesday afternoon. I called the insurance investigator, Agent Miller, back. "I have the meeting tomorrow at 2, I said. "I'm going to present the evidence of the forgery to the parties involved. I want to give them one chance to confess before I hand the file over to you for a formal felony referral." "That's your prerogative, Riley," Miller said. "But be careful. People who steal $67,000 from their own children usually don't react well to being caught. If they sign a confession or an admission of debt, it makes my job easier. If they don't, I'm moving forward anyway based on the hospital's records." I was putting myself in the room with two people who had already proven they didn't value my life. But I needed them to see it. I needed to see the moment the mask fell off in a place where they couldn't hide behind family loyalty. By Thursday morning, I was ready. I arrived at the office at 7:00 a.m. I checked the conference room. I made sure the glass was clean. I placed a single glass of water at the head of the table for myself. I didn't provide water for them. This wasn't hospitality. I spent the morning doing my actual job, clearing my desk of unrelated tasks. I wanted my mind completely clear. Around noon, I saw Marcus. He looked at the central conference room, then back at me. "Compliance officer is aware of the meeting's nature, Riley," he said quietly. "If you hit the mute button on the conference phone, it triggers a silent alert to security, just in case." "I won't need it," I said, "but thanks." At 1:45 p.m., I saw them pull up in the parking lot through my office window. They were in my mother's white SUV, the one with the V's Vision decal on the back. They spent 5 minutes in the car. I watched my mother adjust her blazer in the vanity mirror. I watched Vanessa check her lipstick. They were prepping for a performance. They thought they were coming in to close a deal. They walked into the lobby at exactly 1:58 p.m. I stood up and grabbed the blue folder. My hands were perfectly still. I walked out of my office and toward the glass doors of the conference room. I could see Maya at the front desk. She looked at me, then at the two women approaching. My mother was already talking, her voice carrying across the quiet professional space. "It's just so wonderful to see Riley doing so well," she told Maya, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's always been our little rock, so reliable." "This way, please," Maya said, her voice neutral. I entered the conference room first. I sat at the head of the table. I didn't stand when they walked in. My mother entered with a flourish, her perfume, something expensive and floral, filling the small space instantly. Vanessa followed, looking around the office with a mix of envy and calculation. "Riley, the view is spectacular," my mother said, reaching for the chair across from me. "I was just telling Vanessa this is exactly the kind of environment our brand needs to be associated with. We brought the revised growth projections and the lease agreement for the new wing." She slid a thick, glossy packet across the table. It was titled V's Vision, the future of luxury retail. "I don't need to see those," I said. My mother paused, her hand still resting on the packet. Her smile flickered. "Pardon. I've already completed my audit of your financial standing, Mom. I've looked at the boutique's history, your personal guarantees, and the initial capital injections from 2 years ago." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Riley, do we have to do the big executive act? We're family. Just look at the loan terms. We need the signature by 4 o'clock to secure the deposit." "I'm not looking at loan terms," I said. I picked up the blue folder. I felt the threshold beneath my feet. This was the moment where the last 2 years of my life met the lie that had started them. Before we discuss any further capital, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the glass room, we need to settle an outstanding discrepancy in the records. It's about a sum of $67,000. My mother's face didn't break. She was good. She just tilted her head, a look of motherly confusion settling over her features. The hospital bill, Riley, we talked about this. That's in the past. We're looking at the future now. No, I said, opening the folder. We're looking at the check. I slid the first page across the table. It was the scan of the insurance payout with the forged signature. The room went dead silent. Outside the glass, a group of coworkers was walking toward the break room. They didn't know what was happening, but they noticed the sudden, frozen posture of the two women in the room. My mother's eyes dropped to the page. The color began to drain from her neck, moving upward like a slow-motion spill. I know where the money went, I said. I was at the threshold. The impact was a second away. My mother's hand was still hovering over her glossy V's Vision packet. She didn't withdraw it, she just froze, her fingers splayed against the expensive cardstock. Across the table, Vanessa stopped mid-text, her phone halfway to her lap. I don't know what you're talking about, Riley, my mother said. Her voice had lost its melodic lilt. It was brittle now. The hospital was a chaotic time. If there was a refund, I'm sure it was applied to the— It wasn't a refund, Mom, I interrupted. I didn't raise my voice. I kept it at the same volume I used for quarterly budget reviews. It was a $67,000 insurance payout, sent to Dad as the primary policyholder. It required my signature as the patient to be released. I slid the second document across the mahogany table. It was the high-resolution scan of the back of the check. I had circled the endorsement line in red ink. That isn't my handwriting, I said. Vanessa leaned in, her curiosity overriding her boredom. She looked at the signature, then at our mother. Mom, what is she talking about? She's confused, my mother snapped, finally pulling her hand back and clutching her designer purse. Riley, you were on heavy medication. You probably signed a dozen forms you don't remember. This is insulting. We came here to offer you a seat at the table of a growing brand, and you're digging up administrative errors from years ago. It wasn't an error, I said. I reached into the folder and pulled out the third page, the boutique's own filing. You cashed this check on September 2nd. On September 5th, you injected exactly $67,000 into V.S. Vision as a private loan from the founders. You didn't just forget to tell me about the money. You used it to buy the inventory for the second location. Outside the glass wall, Marcus walked by. He didn't look in, but his presence was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this building. I saw a junior associate stop at the printer 3 feet away, his head tilting as he caught the tension in the room. My mother saw him too. She recalculated. She forced a small, shaky laugh. Even if that were true, which it isn't, we're a family, Riley. Everything we have is for both of you. We used that money to build a business that will support all of us. It was an investment in the family's future. No, I said. It was an investment in Vanessa. I spent the last 2 years working 2 jobs to pay that same $67,000 back to the hospital. I slept on a floor. I lost weight. I worked at a gym scrubbing toilets until midnight after working here all day. You didn't invest in us. You stole my recovery to fund her vanity project. I didn't know, Vanessa shouted. She stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. Mom, you told me that money was from your retirement fund. You told me Riley was handled. Sit down, Vanessa, my mother hissed. I won't sit down. Vanessa's face was flushed. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something that looked like genuine horror. Riley, I swear, she told me the insurance didn't cover it. She said you were handling your bills because you wanted to be independent. She said this money was a gift for me. It was a gift, my mother said, her voice rising, losing its polished edge. It was a gift from a mother who knows which daughter has actual potential. You, she pointed a manicured finger at me, were always going to be fine. You're a worker bee, Riley. You thrive on the grind, but Vanessa needed a lift. I did what any good mother would do. I prioritized the child who needed it most. The room went cold. The daughter who matters line had finally been explained. It wasn't about love, it was about her own ego. She saw Vanessa as a reflection of her own status, and me as a tool that didn't need maintenance. You forged my signature on a federal insurance document, Mom, I said. In the eyes of the law, that's not prioritizing. That's a felony. My mother's face went from pale to a blotchy, panicked red. She looked around the glass room. She realized people were staring now. Maya was at her desk, her hand hovering near the phone. The office was quiet, the usual hum of keyboards replaced by the heavy gravity of the confrontation. You wouldn't, my mother whispered. You're an analyst here. You report your own mother for fraud and your reputation is dead. No one hires a whistleblower who puts her own parents in jail. You'll destroy yourself too. That's where you're wrong, I said. I stood up. I felt taller than I had in years. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a corporate audit. Our firm has a zero-tolerance policy for financial crimes. If I don't report this and it comes out later that I knew, then my career is over. Reporting you isn't a choice, Mom. It's my job. I picked up the V's Vision loan packet she had brought. I dropped it into the trash can next to the table. The thud it made was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. The loan is denied, I said, and the insurance fraud division has already been notified. Agent Miller is expecting my sworn statement by 5 o'clock. My mother's mask didn't just slip, it shattered. She lunged across the table, not to hit me, but to grab the blue folder. I was faster. I pulled it back, and she ended up sprawling against the mahogany, her silk scarf dipping into my water glass. You ungrateful little bitch. She screamed, the sound echoed through the entire floor. After everything we gave you life. And then you tried to charge me $67,000 for it, I said. Vanessa was backing toward the door, her eyes wide. She looked at our mother, disheveled, screaming, leaning over a table in a corporate office, and then she looked at me. She saw the difference. I'm leaving, Vanessa whispered. Mom, we have to go. People are calling security. 2 security guards appeared at the glass doors. Marcus was with them. He nodded to me, a silent question. Are you okay? I nodded back. My mother and sister were just leaving, I told the guards. The meeting is over. My mother straightened her blazer, her chest heaving. She tried to pull her dignity around her like a tattered cloak. She looked at the guards, then at the coworkers watching from their desks, then finally at me. You'll never be one of us, she spat. You'll always just be the help. I know, I said. And the help just finished the audit. You're bankrupt, Mom, in every way that matters. She practically ran out of the room, her heels clicking a frantic, uneven rhythm on the carpet. Vanessa followed her, looking small and broken. I stayed in the room. I picked up my glass of water and took a sip. My hand didn't shake. I looked at the blue folder. The leverage had been deployed. The truth was out. I walked out of the conference room and back to my desk. The office was silent as I passed. No one knew exactly what had been said, but they knew the daughter who mattered wasn't the one who had just fled the building. I sat down, opened a blank document, and began typing my statement for Agent Miller. I wasn't the independent one anymore. I was the one who was finally free. The fallout wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, steady crumbling. By the time I left the office that Thursday, the insurance company had already flagged the $67,000 check. Within 48 hours, my father's personal accounts were frozen pending the investigation. Because my mother had used the funds as a private loan to V.S. Vision, the boutique's assets were also tied up in the fraud probe. The bridge loan she'd come to beg for was the only thing that could have saved her from the foreclosure. Without it, and with the new legal scrutiny, the house of cards collapsed. Vanessa's second location never opened. The flagship was liquidated 3 months later to pay back the insurance company and cover the mounting legal fees. The last time I saw my mother was in a sterile hallway at the county courthouse. She wasn't wearing silk. She looked older, her hair uncharacteristically flat. She didn't scream this time. She just looked at me with a hollow, distant kind of anger. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I'm at peace, Mom," I replied. "There's a difference." My medical debt was officially cleared. Once the fraud was documented, the hospital's internal insurance took over the claim, and every cent I had paid out of my own pocket was returned to me in a lump sum. I used that money to put a down payment on a small, quiet house with a garden. I still work at the firm. Marcus promoted me to vice president of risk management last spring. He says I have a unique eye for hidden discrepancies. I think I just know what a lie looks like when it's dressed up in a suit. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my kitchen and look at my old black binder. I kept it, not as a survival manual, but as a reminder. I look at the pages where I tracked the $200 payments I made while my body was still healing. I realize now that I wasn't just paying a bill. I was buying my own life back, one shift at a time. Independence isn't just about surviving. It's about refusing to finance your own erasure. I stopped asking for a seat at their table, and in doing so, I realized I'd already built my own. What would you do if you found out your family's success was built on your stolen money? Drop a comment below and share the most blatant financial favoritism you've ever witnessed. It's time we stop keeping these secrets for people who wouldn't do the same for us. If you want to hear more about families who choose status over their own children, check out this other story about a parent's financial theft being exposed in the most public way possible. And if you believe in dismantling toxic systems with hard facts, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps me keep telling the truth.